Great. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm here to kick us off with this fabulous event. So, this event is a webinar that is being run by Elector and the Centenary Action Group. This is going to be a safe space for women to hear about the experiences of deaf or disabled politically active women. My name is Emma Vogelman, and I've been working with the Elector, formerly known as the Parliament Project, for a little under a year now. I'm so passionate about tonight's topic because, as a disabled woman who's so interested in politics, I think it's so important for disabled women to see people making headway in this area and have role models to look up to and learn from each other on how we can all become more politically active if that's what we want to do. So, as I said, Elect Her was recently known as the Parliament Project, and Elect Her works to motivate, support, and equip women on their journey of running for political office. The Centenary Action Group is a cross party coalition of organizations and activists campaigning to remove the barriers to women's representation. This includes economic barriers, tackling abuse and harassment against women in politics, and making politics more accessible and more family friendly. The two organizations have been working together, along with the Equal Power Coalition, to get more women in all their diversity into every sphere of government. I just want to set some very quick ground rules for this evening. So, the first one is that this is a safe space for women to come together, share, and learn from each other. We are always going to demonstrate respect for each other's lived experiences, no matter what they are. And also, very importantly, in this event, we are going to be leaving party politics at the door. Please just bear in mind, I can see a few of you using the chat function. So I just want to say that you please do use the chat box to share your thoughts, any resources or ideas with other participants, and use the question function to ask a question to our amazing panel. We will hear from each speaker individually first, and then put some of your questions to the overall panel. Please be aware as well that we are recording this event tonight, so we may read out some of your comments and questions throughout the event and that they will be recorded. So just bear that in mind. I also want to point out that tonight we have some amazing British Sign Language interpreters here with us this evening. We have Quan Perry and Claire O'Donoghue, and we're so thankful for them for joining this event tonight. We are also providing live captions for this session. In the bottom panel, you should see the little closed captions icon or live transcript, and you'll be able to click on that and and the arrow keys will show you the subtitles and show a full transcript or hide the subtitles. You can move the chat box and move the participants around if that's easier for you so you don't block any of the captions. You can also adjust the size of the captions. Just another quick thing before we kick off with the content. So, this is the first time that Elector is running a webinar. We usually have more interactive workshops, and we always love to see people's amazing, beautiful faces and see your reactions in live time. But tonight we decided to use a webinar format, and this is going to enable us to record this session and make it available to others to listen at a later date, which really just adds to the accessibility of this event for the women who weren't able to make it this evening. We will miss all of your interactions though, but please do join in and share your thoughts and all of your amazing comments in the chat function, which I can see a lot of you are doing already. So thank you so much. We have 5 amazing panelists tonight, but we're only going to feature one speaker at a time on the screen so that the image screens will always feature a BSL interpreter and have it be large enough to not cause eye strain for the people who are watching at home. So, the content for tonight's session, we're going to be reflecting on our joint commitment to create a space for disabled women to come together and uplift each other to step into leadership and remain realistic about what the multitude of challenges are and remain for disabled women entering politics. Centenary Action Group and Electra have recently convened a network of disabled women and political activists who meet bi-monthly to share their ideas, share opportunities and challenges. And we've decided it was time to widen that conversation and invite others to listen, share, and to learn. We are, of course, incredibly aware of the huge differences in the lived experience that disabled women face, and this evening, we wanted to ensure that we're hearing from a wide range of experiences. You may have noticed that unfortunately tonight we do not have a deaf woman on the panel, um, but that is largely as there is only one deaf woman who is in political office at this point, and she's spoken at so many of our events in the past, and we unfortunately weren't able to have her join us this evening. We're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to connect with to connect with lots of disabled women in the political sphere, and we really want to gain a wide understanding through these types of conversations that we're having this evening. We already know that politics doesn't reflect the diversity of the people that it represents, and it's never more apparent than when looking at the number of disabled officials. 18% of the working age adults are deaf or disabled, but there are just 5 MPs that are disabled. That's just over 0.7%. As a result of the elections earlier this month, there are now 2 disabled members of the Scottish Parliament and one of them is very kindly joining us this evening. We don't have information regarding the number of disabled councillors who are women, but we are making the assumptions that they are widely underrepresented in this sphere. We are eager for those figures to rise. We want to see more disabled women in elected office. We hope that diverse representation is going to be working with women like tonight, working around, getting people around the table of all types of backgrounds to increase the chances of societal change and to work with us to get the representation that we want to see. On average, it costs a candidate about £11,118 to contest a parliamentary election, and for deaf and disabled candidates, this is even higher. In Scotland, the Access to Elected Office Fund, which is delivered by Inclusion Scotland and supported by the Scottish Government, offers financial assistance to disabled candidates. Previously, the UK's Access to Elected Office Fund and the Enable Fund provided funding for disabled candidates to cover the cost, any additional costs they may face when contesting elections, but this has since been scrapped. The Centenary Action Group is supporting the efforts to reinstate this fund for candidates in Westminster and local elections across England and Wales. We will have the opportunity for questions for all of our amazing speakers tonight, so please do continue making use of the chat box. I would love now to introduce you to each speaker that we have tonight. I am so excited to be introducing this amazing person. We have Pam Duncan Glancy, who is the newly elected Labour member of the Scottish Parliament for the Glasgow region and is the first permanent wheelchair user to be elected to the Scottish Parliament and perhaps in any British Parliament. You may have recently seen her all over your social media feeds, which I certainly have, and I couldn't be more excited that you are here tonight. We would love to hear a little bit more from you, Pam, about what your experiences have been and the support that was in place for you to achieve the amazing success that you've had.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for inviting me tonight. I'm really excited to do this. I think this is possibly the first event with women and with disabled people, and both combined is just incredible. Since I was elected last week, weeks are moving so fast. The 9th of May, I was elected. It's an honour and a privilege to be here, not just to speak to so many incredible disabled women, but also to be able to share my experience, because as Emma's already said so well, our collective experience is important, but we also have individual experience to share as well. And I'm looking forward to hearing as much of everyone else's experience as I can. So yeah, it'd be really good to see what other people are saying and hear what they're saying and see what's going on out there. I've been asked to cover a few things today. So the first thing I just want to say is why did I get involved in politics? And actually, when I think back, there's a few reasons why I got involved in politics. The main reason why I got involved in politics, first of all, I think is my mum. Because she was a bit of a fierce woman who didn't settle for anything less than equal for her daughter. So I have a sister who's 13 months younger than me, and we literally got almost exactly the same experience. Now, it meant that things were done differently. So, for example, my sister went to Paris with the school on a school trip. And we couldn't really afford any international holidays or holidays abroad ever. So my mum was a bit upset that the school couldn't take me on a school trip. So she contacted the local social work department, who said that the only thing they could do was to send me on a pilgrimage. And that's what they were doing for disabled people. I could go on a pilgrimage to France. I grew up without any religion. But despite that, my mum said, you will go to France because your sister went to France, so you're going on a pilgrimage. And that is the extent that my mum went to in order to ensure that I had the kind of same experience as my sister. Jen's experience in Paris was very different to mine in Lourdes. But I have to say, both of us really did have a great time. But that's just a kind of quick, a kind of funky example of the extent to which my mum went. But there are two things that stand out from my childhood that made me think, God, things need to change quite a lot. The first thing is that I studied modern studies in 6th year. I hadn't planned to stay on to 6th year in school. I got the grades I needed to in 5th year, and I got an unconditional offer at Stirling University to do a degree in psychology. But the local authorities couldn't come to an agreement between themselves about who would look after me in terms of the funding for social care. So they were offering all sorts of stuff that frankly wasn't acceptable to me. Like, for example, they were going to measure the intake of my fluid and the outtake of my fluid in a 24-hour period, and then time my toilet breaks, and someone would come in and do that, and then I'd be left on my own for the rest of the day. And I thought, well, that's all good and well, but what happens if I fancy a light sherry in the bar and my toilet breaks take a turn for the worst, and you break the ceiling before you know it, you're never out the toilet. So that wasn't an acceptable solution for me. So we started, my mum started a fight basically with the local authority about how we were going to get the support that I needed to get to university. And in that year where we fought, and it ended up being a 2-year fight, but in those 2 years I studied politics and modern studies at school, and I'm so glad I did. One of the questions that I crashed it, so I hadn't done it in my standard grade, so I crashed it at the higher grade. And one of the questions the teacher asked me was, do you believe in positive action? And I think he probably picked me out because I might have been the only person in the room that looked different to anyone else. And I went to a mainstream school, I should say. And I said, positive action, what's that? So he explained to me that it was about taking action to give people an advantage who perhaps had been disadvantaged in other ways, which is how he described it. And I said, oh no, if I get a job, I want to get it because I'm good at the job, I want to get it on merit. And I went home that day and I told you have a lot to learn. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, if you think you're about to enter into any kind of meritocracy, you're far from correct. And actually, as a young disabled woman from a working class background, you're going to have to take every advantage you can get. So if someone offers you positive action, you grab it with both hands. And so my mum's advice that day, that one, I would face a bit of disadvantage, and my goodness, we all will know what that feels like. But also take every advantage you possibly can, kind of made me start to think, wait a minute, there's a structural thing here that I'm experiencing. And it's not just me that was told I couldn't have the care I need to go to university at the time I had to. It wasn't just me who had to argue with the local authority, because there were no accessible buses for me to be able to get a job in my year out that I had to take because I couldn't go to uni. But actually, in actual fact, these were structural things that needed to change. So that's what drove me to start to become an activist. And one of the very first things we did as in activism was, my mum and I, was we used wheelie bins, and took people in wheelie bins to the local authority and said, you funded all these wheelie bins, which is great, like they're great for recycling, but are you expecting disabled people to travel to work in bins because you've not done anything about accessible transport? So it was a bit of a quirky campaign, but it got me involved. When I did eventually get to university, I found myself in a circumstance where a lot of my colleagues and peers at uni had part-time jobs, but they were all working in jobs that weren't really suitable for someone who was a wheelchair user like myself. So maybe bars or restaurants. And I know there are other jobs around, of course there are when you're a student, but that was the predominant part of it. And I didn't really find a space for me other than in my class. So I was like, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do in my spare time if I have any? And someone approached me one day and said, look, I hope you don't mind me approaching you, but you look like someone that might be interested in being a Students with Disabilities officer. I immediately said, don't you mean disabled students officer? And in answering the question like that, the person said, you're definitely the right person for this job, because there's a huge debate about whether or not you would consider someone to say, I'm a disabled person or I'm a person with disabilities. I won't rehearse that debate here. I'm sure we've all had that debate. And I got involved in the student union, and it was there that I realised that the student union and student politics, and then the Labour Party, and I know this is not about party politics tonight, so I won't go into detail about that, but it's obviously a matter of public record that I'm a member of the Labour Party, that I found my voice and my space, and they gave me a purpose, and they gave me a platform. And I will never ever forget the encouragement that I got from other students to fight for our rights as students. And that's how I got into politics in the first place. Then I decided to become a candidate. Now that isn't something that happens overnight. So I spent a lot of time, 10, 12 years probably, being a local activist in my local party, getting involved in different campaigns, everything from around student loans and ending grants, keeping grants, against ending them, and tuition fees and all sorts of different student stuff. Then we went in, we got involved in rent campaigns, and then I got involved in a campaign to end social care charges. So I got involved in all of that. I became the chair of my local branch. I became the political education officer. I became the trade union rep and the shop steward within my first job that I got, because I started to see the value. Well, I understood the value of collective action because of what had happened to me as a student, and the student movement, but also because I could see that in getting work, it was incredibly important to be able to have someone to speak on my behalf or to support me when I was asking for reasonable adjustments in the workplace. And so I very quickly became the shop steward. And all throughout this, I spent a lot of time working in the party, frankly, arguing within the party as well, and looking to change a lot of it, because the fact that disabled people are oppressed, that there aren't a lot of us live in poverty, that there aren't enough of us in work, that we're more likely to be to do worse in education outcomes, that we don't have the social care we need. All of this is not just because of one political party. There are a number, these things that are plague on all our houses. I happen to think that there is one political party who has more solutions to that. But the fact is there was a lot of work to do. And so we had a lot of fights in our party and out with it. And someone suggested to me in 2007 that my experience would be unique, and that should I consider putting myself forward to have that experience in a platform and in a position. And I said, well, I don't know if I could do that. Like, I'm not sure if I could be that person. Round about the same time, I started to get in touch with someone called Baroness Jane Campbell, who I'm sure if she's not on this call, we'll all know who she is. And she said to me, and I'll never forget it, she said, do not ever underestimate the power of having a vote. And as a woman, I never underestimate the power of a vote, but I didn't quite understand that the extent to which she meant in the room where it happens. So anyone who's a Hamilton fan will know from that reference that I fundamentally believe that disabled people need to be in the room where it happens. And Anne Begg, who in fact was the first, I think, permanent wheelchair user elected to the Westminster Parliament, she was a Labour MP, said that if not you, then who? And so that's why I put myself forward to be a candidate. And I do not think that we're going to be able to face the challenges that we have ahead in terms of child poverty, in terms of worklessness, in terms of lives and livelihoods being lost through the pandemic, and in terms of the climate crisis that we face square on. If we continue to put the same people in the room, was frankly not very far in the past 100 years. So it's time we got different people in the room. And that's been the driving force for me and why I stood for elected office. That experience has been interesting. I've had good, bad and ugly. I'm sure we can all probably relate to that. Some of the things I'll pick out that I think just as some of the sort of more trials. I was asked to cover the trials, triumphs and tribulations. So some of the trials and tribulations was one of the first things that when I tried to get selected within my party, people said, oh, you're a one-trick pony. Well, you know, I'd rather have one trick than no tricks, which a lot of people in Parliament right now have, very few tricks. So I'll take one trick, and by the way, I'll raise you 5 or 6. But not just that, people also would say, now is not the time to take a risk on a candidate that the public might not like. We really need to win this election, so maybe. And this is true across the political spectrum. I hosted a pop-up think tank in 2011 on this issue, and all parties said the same thing. It is a plague on all our houses that we don't get it right to elect enough disabled people in any of our chambers, councils or parliaments. And so I said, well, you know, it might not, now is never the time unless you have the will. If you don't have the will to do something, it's never the right time. And someone put in the chat box earlier on about whether or not we would publicly say we support job sharing for elected members. I absolutely support job sharing for elected members. And the last time I spoke at a party event actually about this, somebody said now's not the time for job sharing. And so you begin to see when people say now's not the time to take a chance on you, it's usually, well, never want, we don't want to do this. So the people who are reticent about taking that chance on disabled people, and frankly, what chance? Actually, the innovation that we bring is something that we're going to need if we're going to face the challenges ahead. But we need to. And the people that are saying not sure about the right time to do this are usually the people that just don't want to do it anyway. So those are the kind of naysayers. I have to say, and I'm pleased to say, those people are in the minority. The problem is when they speak, it hurts, and I get that. That's when the solidarity of sisters like us on these calls and other disabled people across the country and across the world is so important, because it's important to say to one another, it matters. They were always going to push back. They don't like challenge. These people don't like challenging what they think is normal, and it is our job to be there to do that. So please never ever ever hesitate to get in touch to talk about any of this. My DMs on social media are open, and I'm at Glasgow Pam on Twitter if anybody ever wants to talk about it, because it's hard to hear, but we have as much right to be in that room as anyone else. I when I stood for the first time in 2017, I was the candidate in Glasgow North for the 2017 snap election, and I announced my candidacy in a video on social media, and someone replied and said, I'm sick of the Labour Party using the handicapped to get votes. To which I replied, number one, the term you're looking for is disabled person, and number two, this is not the sympathy vote. Actually, I'm the right person for the job. And a journalist replied to that and said, oh, she's a fighter, this one. And that has then become the slogan of my campaigns ever since. So literally, and all my people in my campaign team are like, "Oh, you still fighting, Pam?" Because I'm always like, "So this is why I'm a fighter." But actually, as disabled people, we've had to fight for so much. But that's why we make such good representatives, I think, and that's why everyone on this call should seriously consider it, because if you've made that fight for yourself, then you can do it for someone else, and we can do it together. No one's alone in this fight. We're all in this together, to coin a phrase that's been used in not a great way. And I just want to end on some of the triumphs of it. So we've done the trials, the tribulations. It's not easy, but don't let it stop you. You have a lot of support. I will do anything I can to support every single one of you, no matter what party you're in, to be in the room where decisions happen. So never hesitate to get in touch. But I'll end on a couple of triumphs. The first thing is to say we won an election, which a couple of my campaign team said to me, "This is a bit weird. You've won, Pam." Because it's, as some of you know, it wasn't my first rodeo, and I've been quite good at losing up until now. But eventually, to get over the line, and I got over the line because of, first of all, an all-women shortlist to put myself forward as a candidate, and because of the list representation system in the Scottish Parliament. So never underestimate the power of positive action and PR. Of course, of which I am a huge fan, both of which. And the other thing I think has been a recent triumph, and this really will be the final point I'll make. When the count in Glasgow this time round was run over 2 days. In fact, probably across the UK, in fact, it was run over 2 days. On the Friday, as a list candidate, I was able to go and observe the constituencies being counted within my list region. And then on the Saturday, the region I stood in and the constituency I stood in were finally being counted. So I went on the Friday to go along and have a look and see what was going on and try and do the numbers as you try and do, which is pointless because they open one box and you go, "Oh, I'm winning." Then they open another, you go, "God, I'm losing." But you go for the buzz and to see how it's going. So I went and I had a horrific experience, and I'm sure some of you will have seen that on social media. Nobody believed I was a candidate. They wouldn't let me in. Nobody had a clue the access route for a disabled person. All of this, it was horrendous. I was in the door 5 minutes and ended up in tears before even a ballot box had been opened to start counting. I thought, this is not what I wanted for today. I found myself in the room 45 minutes later, having had an experience that every single one of you on this call will probably have experienced a version of it in daily, I'd imagine, where people don't understand your worth, people don't believe you, people don't think that you're in a position, you have a job, you have a career, you have a family, you're a friend, you have all these assumptions that are made about you. But I also found myself in the room with the chief executive of the organisation who'd made that mistake, and most of Scotland's press. And not many disabled people have that privilege. And I understood the privilege in which that, in the privileged position in which I was, but I used it. And I immediately explained to the chief executive what they'd done wrong, and that I expected it to be changed the next day. They were incredible. Overnight, they changed it. And the press covered it. And what that showed was, when I went back the next day, the experience was far, far better. And to me, that 24-hour period showed in one example what goes wrong when you don't ask disabled people how to design something, or don't get them involved or in the room when you make decisions, and what goes right when you can do it, and how quickly it can be changed, and the power of having a voice in the room. Because if I hadn't been in the same room as the chief exec of the organisation and most of Scotland's press at the time, I have no doubt I would have chalked that up to yet another oppressive experience that you just put under your belt and get on with the next one. And the resilience that we all have to carry with us every single day for those little and sometimes big acts of oppression that we face. And that in itself, that very, very example, to me, shows exactly why we need more disabled people in the room. So it's tough. Yes, it's tough. But every single one of us here have been through a lot. I'm sure of it. We've fought for everything we have, no matter what that is. I'm sure we've all had to fight for it. And that strength and solidarity should never, ever, ever be forgotten. And if there is anything at all that I can do for you, be that on a personal basis or indeed in Parliament, I will not waste a second of time in that chamber in not advocating for the rights of disabled people. And I really, really appreciate you all having me here tonight and listening to me go on for far longer than I think my allotted slot was. So thanks for indulging me in that. And yeah, thank you. I look forward to hearing the rest of tonight.
Thank you so, so much, Pam, for that. That was truly incredible to hear about your experiences, and I've certainly learned a lot. And I hate to use the word inspired in front of an audience like this who have such hang-ups about the word, but I certainly feel inspired. So thank you so much for that. And now I would love to introduce our next speaker. We have the amazing Daisy Cooper on the call tonight, who is the Liberal Democrat MP for St. Albans and is also the deputy leader of the Liberal Democrats. As a current MP, Daisy, we would love to hear about your experience of being an MP with a hidden disability and your work around campaigning for more support for disabled people to enter politics.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Can you hear me all right? My headphones have been
Yes.
playing up. You can. Thank goodness for that. Okay, first hurdle overcome. Good stuff. So I thought I'd just cover 2 or 3 things, if that's okay, Emma. I thought I'd just start by what it's like being a candidate, because actually there's a lot of barriers even being a candidate before you even get elected, and I just thought I'd give them a bit of my experience around that. So being a candidate, and then my thoughts on the Access to Elected Office Fund, and then a little bit about what it's like being an MP. So I joined the Liberal Democrats in 2008 and stood in the general election in 2010 before I became disabled. I got an 8% swing in a seat where the party got a 1% swing as a national average. And so I sort of suddenly appeared on the map as somebody who was a campaigner, somebody who was going to be active in the party, somebody who produced a really great result out of nowhere. And people were very keen to get to know who I was and what I stand in a potentially winnable seat, etc., etc. Over the next 2 years, I became a little bit withdrawn. I became quite tired. I didn't know what was wrong. And all of a sudden, I was in horrendous pain. I got admitted to hospital. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I was told I had 4 days left to live unless I had life-saving surgery. And I felt like my world was falling down. I was told that I may not ever work again. And the only good news I was going to get was that it wasn't cancer. And I literally felt like my job, my ambitions, anything I wanted to do politically was just suddenly going down the drain. And it was a very scary time. Anyway, so I had the surgery and then suddenly found myself trying to learn about a new disease, trying to learn about my limits in terms of how much I could do, trying to get to grips with a new drug regime, which had all sorts of different effects on me, whilst also working out how on earth I was going to go back to work, even on a part-time basis, the impact on my salary and whether I could afford to stay in my house. All these things felt so overwhelming. The idea of getting involved and getting re-involved with politics just felt like a mountain to climb. And then my party launched a leadership scheme. And the leadership scheme was specifically and exclusively for candidates from underrepresented groups. So women, people with disabilities, LGBT plus, and people from ethnic minorities. So from those 4 groups. And yes, I recognise that people from lower socioeconomic groups is also important, but we were using the 4 categories from the Equality Act 2010. And I thought, well, actually, it does say they want people who have a disability, so maybe I could do it. I don't know. But if that scheme hadn't been in place, I honestly don't know whether or not at that point I would have decided to carry on with my political ambitions. Anyway, so I applied to the scheme. On the day of the interview, my goodness, I was on some horrific drugs that day. I was sweating like nothing else. And I just thought, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? Anyway, it was fine. I got onto the scheme. And it's all this kind of mentoring and support and training and all the rest of it. And at this point, I considered myself as having a long-term condition. I didn't even really identify as having a disability, and it was a sudden shock to try and use that word and identify with it. And on this scheme, I found myself making a beeline to 2 other people in the room, a chap called Greg, who's a wheelchair user, and David, who's deaf and requires a British Sign Language interpreter. And David and I became incredibly good buddies over the years. And what I learned from both Greg and David is that they had stood for election before, and David had been elected as a councillor. And that's where I learned about all the kind of reasonable adjustments that different people with different types of disabilities have, because obviously some people have communication disabilities, some have physical disabilities, some have visual disabilities, some have long-term conditions, some have mental ill health. There are lots of different disabilities, and therefore lots of different reasonable adjustments that different people need. I'd learned from David about this thing called the Access to Elected Office Fund. Now, I didn't need to apply to it at that point in time, but David did. And just because we were mates, he was talking me through it. And I didn't really think very much of it until 2015, when the Conservative government decided to scrap it. And then we had the snap general election in 2017, and David couldn't stand. Because to stand for election in a general election, David would need a British Sign Language interpreter. And for a 5-week campaign, that would probably cost him about £25,000. Because you need it all day long for your campaigning, and you need it in the evening for hustings and for meeting community groups, and you need it all weekend. So you effectively need somebody for about 14 hours a day for 7 days a week for 5 weeks. It was going to cost about 25 grand. Not to mention the fact that there were only 2 British Sign Language interpreters that actually lived in his area. So he had real problems. So there was no way that David could stand for election. He was excluded completely from standing in that election, and he was never going to be able to raise the £25,000 from a sort of online fundraiser. And I felt really flipping angry. If I had a couple of glasses of wine, I might use a stronger word, but I felt really flipping angry that my friend David couldn't stand for election at all because of the barriers that were standing in his way in terms of costs. So at the time, I was working for a campaign group called More United, and the board agreed to run a campaign where I coordinated candidates from the Green Party, from Labour, from the Conservatives and the Lib Dems, and we took the government to court through a judicial review. And we partially won our judicial review, and the government re-established something called the Enable Fund, and that was a short-term fund to support people to stand for local elections, but they committed to a long-term review that has never happened into establishing the fund for general election. And it has remained one of those things that I feel very passionately about, and I'm going to continue to campaign on. And maybe another time we'll have a conversation about how I can help do that on the inside of Parliament. So in 2017, I applied to St Albans and became a candidate in a target seat. It wasn't a target seat at the time, but I turned it into a target seat. And I started off by making a few decisions, and these may not be universally popular decisions, and some of you may want to criticise me for it, but I made these decisions and I want to be honest about it. I decided that I wasn't going to talk publicly about my Crohn's disease at all until I was elected. And that was because I didn't want it to be weaponised against me. I thought that trying to win a Tory seat, the Tories would just go around quietly saying on the doorstep, oh, well, you know, she probably isn't going to have it in her. And have you heard about Crohn's disease? People get fatigue and maybe she's not up to the job. And, you know, well, isn't it something that she's trying? And I didn't want it to be weaponised against me. So rightly or wrongly, and you can make your own decision, I decided not to talk about the Crohn's disease publicly until I got elected, until I could demonstrate that actually I could perform at the same level, if not higher than anybody else without a disability. But what I did do is I had to talk to my campaign team about the adjustments that I needed. And I think one of the barriers that we often face is that when you have a disability, you have to fight so hard, as the other speakers were saying, you have to fight so hard for so many things that you actually work a damn sight harder than a lot of people who don't have a disability. And one of the challenges I think we have is being honest with ourselves about what we need to change to support us. So I decided to sit down with a small number of people on my campaign team and have a really frank conversation where it was a no bars hold conversation about the support I needed. So I told them things like, yes, I love going to socials, which have lots of social events, but I can't eat a big meal during the day. So if you want to have a big fundraising lunch, then I can't come to it. So it has to be something in the evening. For whatever reason, and no one really understands why this is, but with Crohn's disease, if you start your day too early, you're more likely to suffer fatigue. And so I just said, I'm not doing any campaign team meetings until 10 o'clock. Sorry, but that's it. Just no non-starter. And then in 2017, when the snap general election was called, I had a sudden rush of adrenaline. And with Crohn's disease, I've got a leaky gut. It's what they often call Crohn's disease leaky gut, which meant that all the hormones and adrenaline went flooding into my stomach, and I was in crippling pain for 48 hours. First 2 days of the general election. But because my campaign team knew that I knew this was going to happen and I'd told them it might happen, we had prepared for it. And so they knew what to do. They started the campaign without me. And I spent the first 2 days in bed in my pajamas with a hot water bottle, phoning donors and asking for money because I'd planned that that might happen. So there are ways to deal with being a candidate and managing your own restrictions. And now one of the things I do within the Lib Dems is I run a training session with Greg and David and others on the changes that local parties can make to support candidates with disabilities and long-term conditions. And that's something that I'm quite supportive of. Anyway, I then got elected in 2019 in December. And I have to be honest, I had never ever had a job where I had felt like it was difficult to agree reasonable adjustments. Normally I'd just say, I need my desk to be quite close to a loo. I need to have access to water at all times. So I'll be carrying a bottle of water into whatever posh meeting we're going into. Ideally I won't start the day till 10, but I'm happy to work, till later in the evening. But these are the kind of adjustments. And I've never had a job where it's been a problem. But then I got elected. And my word, was that a bit of a shock. I got elected on the Thursday evening. I went into Parliament on the Saturday because I was very keen. And the first thing I was told, which shocked me, was you can't take water into the chamber. And I said, well, there's me thinking, I'll get really, really ill if I can't drink water. And they said, oh, well, you can take a little plastic cup in, don't get me started on plastic. But anyway, that aside, you can take a little plastic cup in with some water. That's it. And I said, look, I've got a water bottle this big. I need to have it with me at all times. So you have to ask the speaker for permission. And I asked the speaker and he was fine. But I did think, why on earth do I have to ask permission to have a bottle of water with me when I need it because of my hidden disability? And then there are things like, for example, there was one day, and I won't name the party, but there was one party that was playing silly buggers when we had to go and vote. And the speaker ordered that the chamber was locked. And they always say, lock the doors. It's a little thing you might hear the speaker saying in Parliament, but they physically locked the doors. And as it happened, I had an enormous amount of pain. And had I have been in my office, I probably would have been doubled over on my floor for a few minutes whilst dealing with this pain. But I had to sit in the chamber in front of the cameras, not being allowed out because of this ridiculous system of locking the doors. Then there was the issue around debates, because in debates there's a list system, so the speaker knows when he's going to call you to speak, but you may not know where you are on that list. And other people on that list might interrupt people who are speaking. And if so, they get pushed further down the list. So the list can change. And what we found when the pandemic hit was that those lists started to get published. So I then knew in the virtual Parliament whether or not I was going to get to speak. And if so, when I was going to get to speak. And that helped me to plan my day, which meant I could plan when to go to bed, how long to sleep, when I could eat, how much I could eat, what I could eat, when I could drink water, all those things, all things that I couldn't do when I was in the physical Parliament. Now, I'm still campaigning to have some of the elements of the virtual Parliament retained in Parliament, but it's looking not particularly positive. We'll see what happens. There haven't been any final recommendations yet, but it's clear to me that the vast majority of people and people in government want us to return to the old normal. And as far as I'm concerned, that is ableist. And I will continue to make that point. I've given evidence to the Procedures Committee. I've had a meeting with the Speaker about it, and I will work with any MP of any party whatsoever, irrespective of political values or views, to make sure that we make Parliament a better place to be. I'll probably leave it there.
That was absolutely amazing to hear, Daisy. Thank you so much. And I could see from the chat that so many people were resonating with what you said about not feeling comfortable disclosing your disability when you were campaigning, and the worry about how that's going to be perceived by people who really don't know who you are, what your condition is. And so just thank you so much for sharing that with us. It was hugely insightful. So thank you again. I would now love to introduce our next speaker, and that is Plasta Uzoamaka Ojanaka. I very much hope I pronounced that correctly. And The wonderful Placida is a disability activist with ambitions to stand for elective office, and we would love to hear a little bit more about you and your political journey and the opportunities that you've encountered so far.
Good evening, Emma. Thank you. Pronunciation is fine. Basically, where do I begin? I'm a non-practicing solicitor. I've had over like almost 20 years of experience of working and campaigning and doing different things. However, my journey into politics into politics was I used to live in Hackney, and there's a certain Labour MP who I have a great admiration of. And people used to say, you sound like her, you look like her, you know, maybe you should go into politics. And I thought, okay. So I went to a couple of local meetings while I still lived in Hackney. And this particular MP, Diane Abbott anyway, she was quite a regular on a politics show. I think it's the one that was usually on after question time on a Thursday. And I was drawn to her and I kept thinking, okay, well, she can do this, and you know, why can't I? And I thought, you know, I liked how she voted, what she voted for, the issues that she voted on. You know, I wasn't looking at it like in terms of disability or anything like that at all as well. And most of my adult life I voted, you know, Labour Party, and still continue to do so, hopefully. And a few years later I moved to Enfield, and where I met a few councillors as they were canvassing for local elections at the time, and they invited me to attend a meeting, and I went. I thought, okay, let me see what this is all about. I'm quite nosy and curious. And I thought, okay, yeah, I'll go and see. I'll just, you know, keep quiet, observe, learn, just, you know, watch and see. So I sat quietly. It was a all party. It was all not like an all members meetings. I think within the Labour Party there are different structures as well, depending on which borough and which part of the country you're in. So within a few months, I became a branch secretary for one of the wards, and I held that position from 2010 to 2016. All the while still doing my training contract, doing other things as well. And also at the same time, I also had the role as a disabilities officer within the EC. So I had lots of my Thursday evenings were basically taken up with meetings and something else, one thing or another. So so I held those roles up until around about 2015. And 2015, 2016, which is when I started noticing that my diplopia that I have had now developed into post-polio syndrome, which meant that I would be fatiguing a lot more. My mobility started changing. I didn't have enough energy to do the things that I wanted to do. That's when I stopped thinking, oh, I could do doorstep knocking, etc. So I decided, okay, fine. One of the things that I would continue to do would be, you know, the activism by telephone banking, other things that could be done on a sort of a more seated position in that sense as well. I was fortunate that the office that we used was fabulous. I got to meet very nice councillors who some of them have now become friends, and some are really strong allies in that sense. I had the opportunity, in which I think was a really phenomenal year for me in 2018, in that obviously I became a graduate of the Jo Cox Leadership course, and the sisterhood that I gained from that, and many Jo Cox graduates are now councillors, and some are MPs as well. So, and in various parts of the world. But I had the audacity and the temerity as well to 2018 I actually went and I decided to apply for the MP's position for Chingford and Woodford. It was just, I knew I wasn't going to be successful. This is the seat for Ian Duncan Smith, by the way, and this was at the time when he was, you know, just he was not necessarily the person that people wanted in that way, and especially on disability issues. And I thought, okay, well, it's a neighbouring borough. Let me go there and let me just see, watch and see. Let me try. You never know. Try my luck, because somehow I'm always one of those people that will just try something. Just let's see. Whether it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, that's okay. At least I had that experience of doing something. So I did that, and I wasn't successful, but I got good feedback as well about what I needed to do and how to improve upon it as well. So so there was no loss. I just delighted in applying. So that same year, I was listed alongside Marsha Dakova, who was then the Shadow Disabled Minister in the Shaw Trust. And I was like part of the top 100 in the Shaw Trust list. And I thought, wow, if that isn't a sign, what else will be a sign? Let's go for it. Again, my confidence somehow grew again. And I'm lucky in the sense that I've always been surrounded by females who were quite positive, and that sisterhood that I received from my Jo Cox sisters, from my friends in the Lawyers with Disabilities division of the Law Society, I had that strength to say, go for it. So I considered talking to one of my mentors. She's probably attending today. And I said to her, I'm thinking of applying for the GLA seat, which was to be held in 2019. And I thought, okay, let me just do this again. This is actually better because it's a paid position, and it's not unlike counsellors' roles. It isn't. It's salaried, so you get like. I thought, oh, that'd be a good opportunity to do this, because I wouldn't have to think so much about the cost so much in that sense. Like Daisy said, the cost of pre-standing getting into elected office is very hard. So I thought, okay, let me apply. So I was lucky again with the London Assemblies. I was longlisted, and I was like, whoa, this is fabulous. This is like, keep going. You never know. So, and I thought, okay, longlisted. Then the elections came up, the snap election that was supposed to, the Christmas that was never supposed to have been 2019 happened. And I didn't get selected. Then the pandemic happened, and other people were then chosen to be who were shortlisted. And I thought, okay, I've done this now. That's good. I know what to do. So I'm prepared for what will happen in the future. And there were local by-elections in my area. I didn't stand for it because, again, my disability or the structures around the disability were such that I thought, I can't go out. I can't expose myself to other elements as well. And I wasn't in a frame to sort of push myself a little bit more, to do that extra little work a little bit more harder. So I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to somehow bide my time, and I know what to do. I'm going to gather and absorb all the information I could possibly absorb, follow who I need to follow, campaign, and stay positive as well. And one of the biggest challenges that I feel that we have as a whole, and I think Pam alluded to this, was the fact of not necessarily having a good mentoring type of or coaching system as well to help us through that as well, and especially to help people with lived experiences of disabilities, because like Daisy said, people understanding what is reasonable adjustment is just a minefield, and you cannot have decisions made about disability issues without including people with disabilities, with that actual experience, with that lived experience, to tell you, actually, no, that won't work. However, have you considered A, Y, Z, or whatever? So it's about that, how to navigate. I mean, locally, and I suspect nationwide, there are problems with transport and access. And again, these issues could have been prevented beforehand by consultation. Talk to us, include us in your conversations. Don't just think, oh yes, it's we're going to pick on you because you have Crohn's disease, you have polio, you might be a wheelchair user, and this is how society might think. We have to challenge that society. I wasn't necessarily pro positive action, but following what Pam said earlier on, I am for it absolutely in any means, and I will grab it with all hands and all whatever means, if it gets me to where I need to get, to be that, to have that, be in the, as Hamilton says, to be in the room. If I can do that, then I know that I can actually help others to carry on and go for it as well. So that's what really matters as well. So, and to be able to assist people. So, and I think that maybe, hopefully, if we, the people on the panel here, we could work collectively, continue working with elect her as well, and going through. And hopefully, when the local elections in London occur next year, I'll have lots of people to help me and coach me as well. So I am looking forward to doing that. And I think it's my time to almost be gone soon. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. I'm just sitting here admiring you so much for your tenacity to keep trying and trying, and to go against Ian Duncan Smith, I think is just one of the bravest things I've ever heard of. And to learn from that experience as well, knowing what the outcome would probably be. And I very much hope that you do stand in the next election, and I will be supporting you in absolutely any way I can. And I know so many women on the call tonight will be as well. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. So we have another amazing speaker coming up. We have Dr. Sarabajaya Kumar. And Sarabajaya is a UCL professor and activist, and recently contested the election for the Women's Equality Party, and was a candidate for the Greater London Assembly. And we would love to hear about your experience and how you received support and what support you didn't receive, and your whole journey. So please tell us everything.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I'll just tell you a very brief intro to myself. I got involved in politics, if you like, really from a very young age, but with a small p. So I've been very, very active in civil society for most of my life, and certainly the last 35 years or so. And my sort of academic interests are around accountability and governance. And I've long thought that we really don't have a kind of enough people from enough backgrounds, enough diverse backgrounds involved in governance, and why is that, and how we need to kind of really address that to make a change, and the change we want to see in society. I've been asked to kind of speak to a couple of issues. I guess the way that I got involved in the Women's Equality Party was I faced oppression, obviously, in different ways in my life. I'm a woman with heritage from the global majority, and then recently, in the last 10 years or so, I became disabled. I became both severely sight impaired, I'm legally blind, but also I'm a motorised wheelchair user. And unlike Daisy, I did face an awful lot of challenge in relation to putting in my reasonable adjustments. And there's a whole discussion about what's reasonable and what's not. And it gave me pause for thought. And I just thought, actually, you know what? This is probably not just happening in one organisation or two organisations. It's probably happening systemically, as indeed Pam mentioned. It's structural in society. And so how do we change the structures? And as Pam and others have said, we need to be at the table. We need to be voicing these issues in governance. So that's why essentially I started meeting with this fabulous set of women through the Women's Equality Party, and my two branch leaders at the time, I think one of whom is on the call, were most encouraging to me. They said, look, we're contesting the GLA, why don't you put yourself forward, And I said, don't be so ridiculous. I said, I can't see, I can't canvass, I'm in a wheelchair, I live in a hilly area, I can't even go up to the doors and do the campaigning. And they said, that's actually not what it's all about. what it's about is we can help doing all that, but it's about making the change and getting the change that you want to see in society in. So, go for it. So it was sort of a encouraged conversation. It built my confidence. It was a sort of, as other people have said, a sort of sisterhood. And I thought, okay, why not? Not really knowing what I was doing or what I was going into, but actually, from a very personal perspective, it has been an enormous privilege to be on that journey, and it has been incredibly empowering, actually. So for me, I mean, one of the questions I was asked to address is, why do we need more disabled women and men in politics? And we absolutely need not just disabled women and men in politics, but in governance broadly. We need people on the boards in the voluntary sector, we need people on the boards in the public sector and the private sector, as well as, in local government and the mayoral level, and also regional governments. And this is because we need different perspectives, we need different lived experiences feeding into policy. Without that, policies are only working for certain people, and there's no representation without taxation, right? Or taxation without representation. So we should have our voices there. I think that the only way to do that, and many people have talked about removing barriers. It's absolutely critical that barriers are removed, and a number of speakers have already talked about the Enable Fund. But actually, when the Enable Fund was reinstated, I did try to apply for it, and it was actually inaccessible itself. So when we do have a fund reinstated, which I very much hope we will, so that talented disabled people can contest elections, that is done so that it's an accessible and inclusive process that we can apply for. I think that when you do remove barriers, you have all these fantastic people who've already spoken on the call, and many more probably who are on our audience, who will make an enormous difference with decisions. We all know that the more kind of perspectives, the more creativity, the more solutions are found, really. And that might feel intuitive, but it's also what the research tells us, that we need really a broad diversity of breadth and experience and opinions. So that's pretty important. I also think that, and I'm not bringing party politics into it, but just to say that small parties have a really important role as well, and they can help, and we can help, and indeed I think we did during this election, put things on the agenda, move the conversations on, so that other parties looked at also what we were saying. For example, the mayor in his declaration speech talked about, having a brighter, greener and more equal London. I do think that the smaller parties pushed that agenda in that way. I also think that what's it been like? I was asked, what's it been like contesting an election during a pandemic? So, as I've already mentioned, getting involved in politics has given me confidence and the networks and basically the support, really, to realise my ambition. My ambition is very much about intersectional women getting into politics, and particularly disabled women, because even by being there, even by contesting, we're showing that we're needed and our voices are important and our perspectives are important. So it's really critical. Campaigning during the election was difficult, and it was difficult because it was a pandemic, quite apart from anything else. So we all had to find different ways to campaign. But for me personally, I was shielding from February 2020 till actually the polling day, or the day after polling. So there were other challenges, but as a party, what we decided to do was have many strategies, of which one was kitchen table events. And through those kitchen table events, I worked with other candidates and also volunteers, and we managed to reach many people who hadn't heard of us, some who had heard of us and didn't know what our policies were, some who knew us as individuals, as people, either as workers or neighbours or friends, but they didn't really know kind of our political activities. And it was a very positive process. It was sort of almost like a substitute for engaging with people on the doorstep or through market stalls or through events or through community events. And we got a lot of feedback that way. But also we learned a lot. And I think critically for me, one of the best outcomes of that process was we were able to engage with a lot of people who we possibly wouldn't have engaged with. We engaged with a lot of young people, which I particularly enjoyed, but also different communities, different ethnic minority communities who were most encouraging to us, because they could see people from diverse backgrounds represented, but also they were impressed that we were putting equality issues so high on the agenda, and those issues were important to them too. In terms of what support I received, I was very fortunate to be selected as one of 11 women from all different parties for Activate funding, and that was really important to me, to enable me to be freed up to do my campaigning, really. Even though I was doing it from home, I was able to sort of tap in to support because of the Activate funding. And in terms of the Women's Equality Party itself, I was one of the co-founders of the Disability Caucus, and we are a very strong, supportive space, really. A lot of discussions go on there, and because of that, I'm very, very proud, actually, and to say that one of our caucus committee members and also one of our active caucus members, a very brilliant disabled woman called Amanda Carter-Philpott, who was elected. You said right at the top of the call, we weren't quite sure how many local councillors were elected. She is a disabled woman, and she was elected as a councillor in Bletchley and Fenny Stratford. And we're particularly proud because she was our second councillor to be elected from the Women's Equality Party and the first disabled woman. And she's absolutely brilliant, and it's not a surprise to me that she was elected, but I'm absolutely delighted to say that she was. And I think that I hope that that's partly because of the support that we have through the caucus, but also through Elect Her and through CAG, because I know that she's one of the people that have been involved in those discussions. And what I would say is that I want to see many, many more Amandas out there. She's phenomenal, but there are many, many more, and we can make such a difference to society to make it much more inclusive and diverse. In terms of the key changes I'd like to see, various people have talked about the access to elected office funds, so I probably won't say more than that. But also Daisy talked about kind of the ways of working, and perhaps that needs to really be looked at in all organisations, actually, to be much more inclusive and less ableist. I can't see why organisations wouldn't want to include talented disabled people. They're absolutely losing out if they don't. And finally, I guess a point I wanted to make was about online abuse. So because I'm blind, I have a sighted support worker, and she filmed me doing a little 30-second slot about why I was what WEP meant to me and why I was doing what I was doing, and put it on Twitter. And the next day I got a number of likes, and she was telling me about it, and then she said, oh, we've got some comments, and then she went very quiet, and then I said, oh, are they what kind of comments? And she said, oh, well, I said, is it troll? And she said yes, and I said, I have made it because somebody's noticing me. So the thing is, there will always be people in the world that will put do negative comments to people. The point is, please do not be put off by it. It's really important the space you inhabit as a disabled woman. It's really important your voice. It's critical, and we don't want the status quo, and we don't want people who are, as other people have said, perhaps naysayers, or people who want to retain the status quo because they don't like change. That's not for us. The world isn't working for all of us, and it needs to. So that's what I would say. Don't be put off. But what I would also say is that given that there will be always some people that engage in this kind of behaviour, it is really important that legislation is needed to tackle online abuse against women. And as a member of the Centenary Action Group, I'm a member of the steering group, I'm also calling for the government to include abuse against women in the online safety bill. But I just kind of want to wrap up, really, because I know that people have gone over time and things, but I just want to say that honestly, it is such an enormous privilege to have been part of contesting the election. We didn't quite get over the line with the Women's Equality Party in the GLA elections, but it's part of a process, it's part of a movement, and we have been managing to influence others and change conversations and have an impact. And please don't ever estimate your impact. The fact that we've got things to say, and yeah, just please, if you're interested, do go for it. That's all I would say. I'll end on that. Thank you, Emma.
No, thank you. I found that so insightful, and I honestly really admire the way that you and your networks utilize the technologies that we've become reliant on during the pandemic as a way to campaign and as a way to make your voice heard in really difficult times, especially someone who is shielding. So I admire that so much, and I very much hope that you contest another election very soon. And if we can support you, please say. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you.
I have another amazing speaker that I am so excited to introduce. We have Fiona Robertson, and Fiona is a member of the Scottish National Party, is the co-chair of the SNP Disabled Members Group, and the former Equalities Conserver for the party. We would love to hear from you, Fiona, and what decisions you've the decisions that you've made relating to disability and standing as a candidate, and all of your amazing work so far.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And weirdly, as of yesterday, I am now the equalities convener again. So it's things have changed quite quickly. But I'm really glad to be here. I want to, just in terms of Scottish solidarity, I want to say how thrilled I was to see Pam at the beginning of this, and how I'm so excited to see you in Parliament. I know that you've already been making contact with Emma and some others, and that's I think that I'm really looking forward to seeing what the disabled women in this new Holyrood intake do. I'm here partly to talk about why I didn't run for election, because while more people being included is fantastic, who is still excluded is important too. I thought about it for a long time, and I did go through our party's candidate assessment process. I was put on the list, and I noted my interest in the Northeast region while I tried to see if there was any way that I could reasonably do the work. The Access to Elected Office Fund would have helped with the campaign, and that would have been great. And the Scottish Parliament does give extra funds to disabled MSPs to cover things like extra staff and the standard extra costs of being disabled in that role. But my condition includes a lot of energy limiting symptoms. And I ultimately felt that as the role is designed right now, I would not be able to serve my community in the way that they would deserve. And it was a really hard decision because, especially in the next 5 years, as the fallout from COVID affects everything from housing to healthcare to social care to employment law to the environment to transport, then having disabled people in that chamber is going to be essential. And it was hard to make the decision not to go for it. If there's ever a way to do job sharing in elected office, I will be right there and giving it a go. But for now, my energy is directed towards making sure other people get elected. I was always interested in politics, but I didn't really get involved until I got sick and I had my first experiences dealing with the DWP. Yay for challenging IDS. For many years, from about 2005 till 2014, I was focused on mostly disability politics outside of party politics. But after the independence referendum, I realized how essential it was, as everyone has said, that we are in the room where those decisions are made. And as I was not going to be able to stand for elected office, I knew I had to be involved in other ways. So as it happened in the first few months after I joined the SNP, the first Disabled Members Conference happened. So I went along to that. And at the main national conference a couple of months later, I was elected onto the first executive committee of the Disabled Members Group. And we started out small. We were trying to build kind of basic awareness. And one of the first things that we did was roll out some disability awareness presentations that were given at every branch in Scotland. After a year or so of trying to build that up, I decided to run for, and I won the National Women's and Equalities Convener role. It's a seat, it's a national level position. It has a seat on the National Executive Committee, but it was a ridiculously huge job for one person in a mass membership party. But for me, I felt like, as most of us know, we're often in positions where we have to choose which bit of ourselves we're going to represent and focus on at the exclusion of others. And the reality is our lives are affected by the intersections of types of oppression and exclusion. And it's my personal strong belief that we're all dealing with the same large structure of oppression, but it affects different groups and different people in different ways and to different extents. The Women's and Equalities role let me look at it as a structural system as a whole, and the ways in which people are kept out of power, with the obvious caveat that there are group-specific needs which needed to be addressed as well. That year was quite a learning curve, but it was largely setting the groundwork for the year after, when the National Women's and Equalities Convener ceased to exist and was replaced by a whole group of equalities representatives called the Equalities Forum. And this came with 8 seats on the NEC. There was an equalities convener to bring it all together, a women's convener, a BAME convener, a disabled members convener, and then representatives from formal affiliate groups covering disabled people, LGBTQ plus people, and BAME people. I ran for the Equalities Convener and won it. And in that role, the Equalities Forum became an incredibly positive group. We worked together and we showed up for each other and for each other's events and needs and campaigns. We lent our weight to each other. And we joined a conversation which had already been started by the party about how to expand the system of all women shortlists into other types of marginalization. The most important thing that we wanted to ensure was that it wasn't going to be used to dilute women's representation. Our kind of nightmare scenario was us ending up with 50% of places being left for straight white cis-abled men, and the other 50% for everyone else to fight amongst themselves for. So it's complicated to balance, and it's largely untested in law as well. That was our biggest stumbling block. So there was a lot of wrangling. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to get a system built for the constituency selection mechanism, but for Holyrood, for the elections just passed. But we did manage to get a selection mechanism for the regional lists. And that led to us having a campaign where every one of the 8 regional lists was led by someone who was either disabled or BAME or both. And because of this system, we now have 2 incredible disabled women in Holyrood in regional positions. And we also have 1 disabled woman in a constituency MSP role. And one of those regional MSPs, Emma Roddick, I think she's already like raising hell and making sure things are accessible, and the remote working is still going to be in place and doing all kinds of amazing things. So I count that as one of my great successes. In my party equalities work, I've focused on education for branches, education for vetting committees, so that when decisions are made about who's the right candidate, people aren't excluded for things like not being able to do the chapping doors every day or showing up to all the physical meetings, and that they take into account other forms of activism and commitment. We've worked on trying to make party events and campaigning more accessible, but I also developed training materials on unconscious bias with all of the requisite warnings about that not being a magic fix. And I ended up writing a 10-page document about what is disability and who counts as disabled and why does that matter, after quite a bit of angst surrounding who was allowed to use the regional list mechanism. Most of what I've learned is that with the best will in the world, politics is about power, and people don't give up power easily. And in many arenas, lots of really good people want equality, but they largely want disabled people or Black people or women or trans people or whoever to give them lists of words not to use or guides for accessible meetings. And those things are important, but once you start challenging power structures, then you suddenly become a threat. And having shared solidarity with other equalities groups in that situation is essential to keeping you going. Making links with groups across party lines or outside of parties like Elect Her or Inclusion Scotland. Progress terrifies a lot of people, and there's always a backlash, and it's hard to deal with. Just becoming the equalities convener again, it's been 24 hours and the conspiracy theories and abuse have ramped up immediately. And it's tough, but my focus after this election cycle is making sure that our marginalized candidates are given protection and support in the local elections next year. When we ask people to step forward in this global climate of people coordinating against the woke, we're asking people to put themselves at risk. And it's our responsibility to give them whatever support and protection we can, because they will get orders of magnitude more harassment than the average candidate does. Peer support is fantastic, but we need structural support. Things linking in with disciplinary measures and the ability for people with a working knowledge of equalities to be able to intervene in local politics and discrimination issues. Unfortunately, context is everything when it comes to equalities issues and complaints. It's not clear cut a lot of the time. And what is considered reasonable is typically decided by abled people or by people with other forms of privilege, which means that we're usually cast as the unreasonable. So let's be unreasonable. I'm not going to accept how things have been done as a reason for how things are going to be in the future. We've got this wealth of experience and insight and expertise and will, and it's not charity to include us. We bring immense problem-solving experience. We see things other people don't. We're an asset, and we should be recognized as such. So I'm going to keep doing the work to challenge that exclusion in whatever way I can, to get as many amazing people into office as I can, and to make the structural changes needed. Because if I can't be in those rooms, then I want to be represented by people who do understand my life and who care about the barriers that I live with. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Fiona. That was so interesting. And I just think it's fantastic the work that you're doing to allow other people to stand in a safe way and get the support that they need. I completely hear you when you're talking about the increase of online abuse that disabled people can face, and disabled women in particular. And I admire your work so incredibly much. So thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
So I, in the interest of time and that we are meant to be wrapping up at 9 tonight, I've covered so much amazing ground from all of our speakers, which I'm sure everyone agrees with, but unfortunately we will not have time to take questions in the question and answer. So I'm very sorry to all the people who have put that in. But what we would love for you to do is to post your questions either here or on Twitter, and we will try and get them answered by all of the panelists who were here tonight. And just to say thank you to everyone for your participation in tonight's event, our amazing panels, speakers of Pam, Daisy, Placida, Sarah Bajaya, and Fiona. Thank you so much for being so brave and sharing your experiences with us, and we give you all of our support. And I want to say a really big thank you to our BSL interpreters of Claire and Quan for keeping up with all of this amazing conversation that we're having and making this event so accessible and inclusive. I would love to direct all of you to the work of Elect Her and the Centenary Action Group, who are continuing to campaign for disabled women to be represented in politics in the way that we've heard tonight. And that we've heard is so important to get our voices heard and get our seats around the table and get us involved in all levels of decision making. So please do follow everyone tonight on social media. And just to remind you about the Equal Power Network, this event was part of the Equal Power program, and it provides free online training for women getting into politics, using their voice online and getting active in their community. And it's so important as well to mention that the Elect Her also offers peer support circles, and we invite women to campaign with us and to tackle the barriers that we have heard about tonight. And thank you so much for all of your amazing comments. I've been so inspired by everyone tonight. And please do get in touch with all of the speakers with any questions, with Elect Her and the Centenary Action Group. And thank you so much, and good night, everyone.